All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. We'll battle our way through the screen legibility to talk about this, but I just wanted to bring you up to speed with what has been changed in DNN 9.4, specifically with regard to GDPR. Now, as you all know, GDPR came into effect last year, and we were hoping that at that conference already we could present a bunch of newness in DNN regarding GDPR, but that turned out to be too much of a challenge for our open source community to get done in time. Since then, it went through, a couple of corners left, a couple of corners right, and at some point I picked this up and decided to kind of move things a bit faster ahead, so to get it into 9.4. And we need to talk about what my goals were, first of all, in this whole exercise. So the thing that was important for me was that the code changes had to be as minimal as possible for the platform. Because as you know, all the code that you add has to be maintained, etc. So try to reduce the complexity of the solution, to not set the bar too high in terms of what we want to do with GDPR support. Don't try to cover all of the use cases that are out there, which was, I think, the error of the original team that tried to attack this, is that they set their ambition level so high that in the end nothing happened because it became too complex of a thing to solve. To leave room also for third-party solutions, I strongly believe that a platform should never try to solve every single thing in the universe, but should provide ample opportunities for other developers to jump into and provide custom solutions to really do exactly what your customer wants. But to try to cover, the 90% use case of this. Just an overview. I think if you ask 3-4 different experts on GDPR, you get 3 or 4 different answers on what GDPR exactly is, because it's a huge volume of details. I would invite you to ask Benoit, who, for instance, has done a lot of work in this respect to study GDPR. But if you'll allow me, I'm going to give a broad overview of what I understand GDPR to attack. So the core of it, meaning if you're storing user data, if you're storing details about users, then you are bound, and those users come from the EU, then you're bound by this thing, right? That's the kind of, it's an important thing to keep in mind. That the entire directive is a big set of paper, but covers many non-technical aspects, like, for instance, you should have a manager in place that keeps an eye on this and this, and certain protocols, like what happens if you have a data breach. All that stuff is non-technical and doesn't really concern us here. And that your contract with your user should be telling the user what it is you're storing about the user and why you're doing this. That is part of transparency, right? Your site, if you're storing data from a user, you can kind of see where this GDPR is going, is providing transparency to the end user and providing control for the end user about their data. And the control thing is that the user should consent to you storing that data, and should be able to ask you to, for instance, give you the data back, or to be able to delete it. Right? These are the core tenets of this. So, so in detail, what we're looking for is that the user must have a way to. We must be prompted to accept the current privacy protocol, and the checkbox that, to say okay must not be checked. That's one of those things that's mentioned everywhere. It's like, make sure you don't pre-check that checkbox, as many sites have done in the past. That's a big no-no. The user must be allowed to bail out at any moment. So you're going through some process, and at any point, the time the user say, "No, actually, no, I don't want this. Don't want you to store any data." At that point, you have to give him an off ramp, so to speak, for this whole thing. If your contract changes, then you have to ask the user again. Right? You have to inform him. So look, our conditions have changed. Now you have to click again that you've read those conditions and you agree to them. Again, not pre-checks the box. If you're sharing data with third parties, then the users have to consent with that. In other words, you have to be transparent. Like, why? What are you doing with that data? So, are you giving it to some other party or not, etc. Those are important parts. A user may ask you, so what do you have for me? Right? We've all read that in the news that Facebook now has to send you all your data if you request it. And if a user says, "I want you to delete my stuff," then that must be possible as well. So in DNN 9.4, because GDPR doesn't really mean anything outside of Europe, we've gone with the term data consent. Right? So if you're looking in the API for the keyword, like when it says data consent in one word, I try to be as consistent as possible in code. You see data consent, it's part of this change. It's part of what we're building out in this. And you will find it in the UI under site settings, site behavior, and then the privacy tab, where there's also the cookie consent setting that was added in 9.3. It has a big master switch and a support for a user deletion mechanism. With that said, I think it's time for us to have a look at this. Just flipping through the sheets here, and quickly run the latest version of 9.4. Did I not even install it yet? I'm going to install a plain vanilla 9.4 site, and hopefully this should of course have been done yesterday night, but unfortunately time was running out on me last night. But you will be familiar with this screen, maybe. And with a bit of luck, I had tested it before, but so. DNN host, and then we have to change it probably to DNN host 1, for instance. DNN host 1, change password. There you go. All right, now let's have a look. We have under the site settings, under site behavior, privacy, a new section here, data consent settings. Is that visible for you guys here? All right. So the basic idea is that yes, we have one master switch that just activates or deactivates the whole mechanism. That makes it quite simple to see if it's active or not, just like the cookie consent as well. And this I will come to later, the consent redirect. Under normal circumstances, you will not need to use this. And an action to take what in case the user wishes to be deleted. Now there are four settings here for user delete action. Off, meaning the entire mechanism is disabled. The user cannot actually request to be deleted. Now that means, of course, you are not complying to GDPR, but of course you might actually provide your own mechanism somewhere else. And you say, no, I don't want this, the core mechanism to do this for me for user deletion. At this point in time, the user will not be shown a delete button during the consent process by DNN if I leave it off. Manual is a mechanism where if the user has requested to be deleted, the admin will need to take action after this. It's just marked for the user. Okay, this user wishes to be deleted. We store that value. Then other software can jump in on that and say, okay, well, actually, we need to do something with this here. There is a delayed hard delete and a hard delete. The other two options. The last one, hard delete, is the most rigorous one. The second the person says, no, I want out, delete me, it will rip out the user out of the database. Now, as you all know, that has some consequences, and at that point in time, there's no way to recuperate this, right? It's just gone from the database. There are modules that might rely on the user being there. So there are some issues that you have to look, at your site, like, can I switch this on, yes or no? So a kind of a softer option to this is the delayed hard delete, where you specify a time frame after which a service in DNN will kick in and say, okay, well, everyone that requested more than a day ago, for instance, all right, a time slot ago, to be deleted, I'm hard deleting that. That user is being removed from the system.
Sorry, can I ask?
Yeah.
Only delete the user from the user table, or also the...
Good question. Good question. As you know, user deletion is extremely tricky in DNN because we have portal virtualization. So there is a record in ASP.NET users and ASP.NET membership for every user. There is a record in users, the users table from DNN. There is a record in user portals for every user, for every portal, user / connection to portal. Now,
User roles as well.
And user roles, exactly. Now the thing is that I have not reinvented the user deletion mechanism, to be clear. I'm using the core user deletion mechanism. There is actually one. And what it does is that already protects against data corruption in a sense that it will delete the user portals record. It will delete the user role, all the records that are related to the specific portal for the user. And then it will attempt to delete the entire user if it is not found in any other portal. Right? It will then do a count, like, okay, so how many portals is the user still a member of? Like 0? Okay, well then it's okay. Then I can remove the entire user. And at that point, that mechanism will kick in.
For instance, it's not deleting the journal module where a user has created a comment and is referring to the user.
So it will definitely, there is a potential for an error happening there. If a table has taken a foreign key on the users table and it does not allow that user to be ripped out, right? Then an error will occur, obviously. So it's something that you would need to test in any scenario. Michael?
In my eyes, there is one option missing at least, which is anonymization.
Yes, I will come to that because that's one of the things that I looked in detail, anonymization. And again, the tricky thing here is you need to be absolutely sure that you're not screwing up another portal. So there are complexities around this, which I haven't been able to solve in the time frame that I had to implement this. It's on my wish list to provide anonymization, but I cannot. In this solution, we can't do that yet. So it's Stefan.
What's about the files in his user directory?
The user folder, yeah. Well, actually, the user delete mechanism takes care of that. So the core user delete mechanism does do all the dirty work of cleaning up a user, and so again, I didn't want to create a second mechanism, so to speak, next to it, but rather just use that. And if that's broken, then we'll fix that, right? So by all means, test. You know, it's I think it's a good one. We need to make sure that the entire user does get cleaned up, and that we satisfy goals. In fact, you know, for GDPR. So let's say we go for hard delete in this case, and I'm just going to save it. Now I need some users in this thing, and that is going to, if you do it by hand, of course, it's going to take a lot of time. DNN 940, right? So it would be, yeah. I think it was that command, right? All right. Portal null, portal, how many roles should we add? Like 10. And just add, I don't know, like 200, 300 users. All right. Now, if we head off to our users here, we have to refresh the screen. Or I have to probably. There's been an issue with some funky CSS that we've been having in our run up to our testing. So I hope it's been solved. Yeah. Okay. So I just needed to load the new CSS coming out of the framework. Anyway, so we have a bunch of users here. As we can see, there's now a new column in front, which just holds one single icon. So when the master switch is thrown, the user's module in the admin experience gets an extra column next to it, and the extra column gives you information about the status of the user. Now, the potential statuses are like the default one when you've switched it on. The user hasn't consented yet to anything. The second status is the one that you want. Of course, the user has consented to the terms and conditions of the site. At that point in time, this thing will become black. And then there's a third one, which is a red slash through a user, which says this user wishes to be removed from the site. So you get feedback on the different statuses of. So if I'm going to take the first one here, I'm going to go to custom DNN 940, and I'm going to try and log this user in and go pass with a very difficult password. Then all of a sudden I'm confronted by this screen. So the way it's implemented is it piggybacks off of what is in the what is the exact control? I think users not the users control, I think the login control or accounts. Yeah, but it's under so it's desktop modules, admin, login. I think is ASCX is the one that holds the entire login experience for DNN with all the screens, because it's got multiple screens, because it's also got password reset, for instance. And I found it was most akin to password reset, which is also something like you log in and you have to go through this because apparently your must change password. That's what must change password process. So it sits next to that, right? And so it means you bring up basically a new screen in that workflow where you're warned. You say, well, you must agree to our team's terms to continue, and you've got a link to the terms of use and the privacy statement. I launched an internal debate on whether it was really necessary to have two things. We still have terms and conditions and privacy statement. The return I got was like, well, first of all, that's going to be a breaking change. People are going to be upset. And secondly, that there are legal issues for certain countries where you need the two separate. So, okay, we keep them separate. There's going to be terms of use and privacy statement here. There are links, so you can just go and see that. At this point in time, the user is not logged in. Note, right? But given web forms, you have filled in your credentials. So on a post back, it comes back again. But the interesting thing is, if you bail out of this, yeah, you can't screw it up this thing. So what you if you you can't bypass it halfway and say, well, I'm just going to close this window, not consent, and still try to get through to the data. So the normal course of action will be, okay, I'm going to log in. I consent to this use of data.
Peter, before you submit, is there any cookie or session set?
No. Before you submit it, it's
before the user authenticated event.
Exactly. It's before the user authenticated event, and before the user there's a user login event, I think, as well. Like you first you check if the user is okay to log in, and then at the end, there's an action like, okay, then switch to this user, and there in that code the cookie is actually transmitted or set to be transmitted to your browser.
But you're visiting the website as an anonymous user before you hit the login button?
No, because you've filled in web forms already your username and password. So I can look you up. You've given me your username. I can look you up and I can see you haven't consented yet. So I'm going to confront you with that login screen.
Yeah.
And until you have passed that login screen and the login pop-up or screen just disappears, you're still not logged in. DNN is still working, right?
But for instance, if you have the Google Analytics settings in the website,
yeah,
are they already loaded and capturing?
No,
before?
User ID is not on the thread.
Okay.
No, there is nothing. No module underneath also will detect that a user is being set.
So it's before the validate user.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
after you consent, then we validate the user credentials.
exactly.
So if you actually typed them in wrong and then
Exactly.
okay,
then you'll
and
be.
then you'll go back to your
exactly.
path. Okay.
Exactly.
But isn't that, I'm guessing that this is independent of injecting Google Analytics. We asked for Google Analytics.
Yeah.
But that's independent of
Well, I guess the Google Analytics, when it's injected, it uses the user ID that's on the thread, right? So any page that loads, right? If the Google Analytics go out and you've got any module that uses the user in some way, it takes it from whatever is set in the thread. Like, okay, well, this user ID is now, this is the user. But since you don't have the user at this point, it's just -1, right? The user ID. It just looks like it's an anonymous request at this point.
Yeah, so DNN does inject Google Analytics, but anonymously.
Yeah, until you're logged in. It doesn't. It can't do it because formally you're just not logged in. Let me take another user here. Control C. I'm gonna go with the next one.
So I have a
Yes.
question, Peter.
Go ahead.
Now I understand that if you have existing users, then you this at login, but if you're having a new user sign up, then we can ask them to consent it and sign up.
Yeah, you can. And so if you set that value in the database, then this will never show up, right? So I will show in a bit where the data actually hides, so that you guys know. So actually, to come back to your point, the password is checked here, but the user is not yet logged in.
Oh, okay.
In the authentication or in the login flow.
You're validating, but not ever.
Right. There is in DNN there's a separate step between kind of checking if the user is okay, and actually setting the thread like the guy's now logged in. And before that final step, we do all of our logic. This whole wizard runs a number of times. So, yeah.
And I was wondering about the delete me thing.
Yeah.
Delete yourself before accepting the.
Yes. Yeah. That's crucial. Of course, you have to be able to say, well, no, I do not consent to you using my data, and I now wish to be deleted. Given that this is a hard delete, and we're deleting user Candice Grogan here. And so if I say delete me, then it will show a warning message. And if I go back and refresh that screen, then we should not see that person anymore. Bloody hell, this CSS thing is upsetting, isn't it? All right, again. All right, the other one has now vanished. And this one now has a tick, like the user has agreed to the terms. And so now if I go to the site settings and site behavior, I'm going to choose a different deletion mechanism. I'm going to choose manual delete, for instance. At that point in time, so I go back to the users here, and I'm going to go use this one, Control C, up, login, up, Control V. It's like, okay, I want it to be deleted. There's a these messages now change based on that setting of what will actually happen, to give the user the feedback, like, okay, we will work to remove your personal data from this site shortly. After it has been removed, it can no longer be recovered and your data will be lost forever, etc. So it gives you the warning, but it also gives you the feedback that this is not instant. This is something that we do behind the scenes, which is totally legal. You can to do that. The user is not logged in, obviously. Right, and now the account has been deactivated in DNN. That we can, sorry, again switching to the wrong screen. Here we go. If I now refresh that screen, we see under unauthorized users, this unauthorized user with the details that they wish to be removed, and it's written here as well to be quite visible. User deleted is false, but there's a note just underneath in red, requested removal.
Is the user able to undo that?
No, not the user. He will need to write an email to the admin, say, I'm sorry, I accidentally clicked this. Can you please undo? That's why we have the delayed one as well. Is you can add a message on your site saying, look, if you accidentally delete yourself, you contact me.
Yeah.
And
but I think you should have a time span in the data in the privacy policy, where you say when you request it,
exactly,
will be deleted within 7 days.
For instance,
something like
yeah,
this.
exactly.
Because you can't say we delete you once. We delete all the ones who requested this once a year. And we did it yesterday, so you have to.
Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, we can't take care of all the different texts that we deliver by default from DNN. It is up to you to make a solid privacy statement which really corresponds with the way you run your site, and then to use the settings to correspond to that. The filters here have also been increased to increase the have been, we've had new filters, so you can see all the users that requested removal, etc. Obviously.
Could it be an idea to create a scheduled task that runs, say, once a week or whatever?
That's okay. So I'll show you again. Wait, you must have missed it actually. I'm sorry that it wasn't clear enough. So here there is a delayed hard delete user delete action. At this point, if I save it now, I go to the other site again, or go to the users. Hang on a second, users, and I'm going to use this one, and I try to log in. Password. Boom. So, okay, now delete me. Okay, and that person is now marked as. Right, now that person now also marked as deactivated, etc. Now what happens is that after 1 day, that account will be hard deleted.
So there's
yeah. So if I go to the scheduled tasks here, scheduler. Yeah, and the other one too. Yes. No, it's not per user. So you go to the scheduler. There is now a task: purge deleted users. Right, but it only takes the ones that have requested removal. If you as an admin say I deactivate this user or I delete this user, it does not do anything because it actually it is specific to this mechanism because this is by default on.
And can you set the user as an admin to request removal?
Can you set a user as an admin
Can I manually put somebody in a queue?
To request?
To
No.
be removed?
No.
Because that would be a nice addition, I think.
No.
So, you know, if you have somebody manually handling it, it could be nice if they could check a few users and still wait for, 2 weeks for them to respond. Sorry,
Yeah. I write it out. Write it out in a.
Maybe there's also people have the possibility to send you a letter and say, please delete me. So
Yeah.
you have to use this.
Although in that case you still have a hard delete function, right, on someone, like you can delete someone, but so anyway, again, I wasn't trying to solve all use cases. I'm trying to go for like the common.
Very good like this.
Yeah. Now I think the next thing I want to do is for the developers to show where the data is.
Make a consent some
Yeah.
point in time.
Yeah.
And you log in again.
Yeah.
Where do I find as a user the delete me?
In the place where it actually always was.
Okay.
In your user, I can't show it in this one because it's super user, but in the user profile there's the delete button,
Okay.
and that will, when data consent is switched on, it will go through the same process as if you click delete me on the button on the thing. So that's also harmonized, like the same logic kicks in.
Yeah.
Is it prevented? Sorry.
Yeah.
If a delayed deletion is turned on,
Right.
do users get a notification when the final deletion has occurred?
No, not yet. No. That could be an interesting addition. Yes.
And the scheduled task deletes all marked users?
Yes, all marked users as who wishes to do. No, but after the all marked deletion, but it checks the time. So it says, okay, you've requested this when, and then
So if you have a duration of 7 days.
right. If you could exactly, you can set it for 7 days, and it won't delete anyone that was earlier or later, shorter. Yeah.
Did you prevent that an admin can delete himself via this?
I think DNN actually protects against that as well. Admins need to, but actually admins are regular users, but host users are not.
Yeah.
Right. So host users can't. No.
Admin can.
Admin can, yeah. But again, that should come out of testing, in my opinion. These kind of edge cases of like, okay, can someone screw it up the way they do it? So just to give you an idea of where it, because I have two more things that I want to talk about. One is like where the data is. So that is in user portals. We now get, if we check these, this table, we have the old table, authorized, is deleted. So this binds the user to the portal, right? Everyone here familiar with the user's portal table, right? And what it does. Refresh roles, vanity URLs, and now we see at the end some new columns. So has agreed to terms, has agreed to terms on, right? It registers the time that you've consented, and it records requests removal. That's a Boolean, just yes or no.
Why
Yes, Ernst Peter.
has agreed to true or false and not a date timestamp?
It's the date timestamp is in on, and whether it has agreed to terms is just a Boolean. So these go hand in hand, but it makes it a bit faster to sort and try it.
Stored the date requested for removal.
Huh?
The date requested, the time and date requested.
That's actually the last modified date on the user. Because if you update that, you will get a last modified date on the user.
So is that correct then? Let's say user request removal and we have delayed deletion, let's say a week later, but an admin goes in and updates their
Right.
profile
Then
or
it
something,
shifts
so
it up.
we'll get them another
It
7 days.
shifts them up. Yeah. We can change that behavior if we feel that is necessary in the future. At this point in time, I thought, okay, this will do what we want right now, and I'll leave it at that.
But this has a possibility that it is not deleted in the 7 days from the day that the particular user said I want to.
If someone fidgets with the user account,
Yeah.
but again, it's kind of an edge case. So to come back to your earlier point, Mandeep, if you register, so if you create a new user through some other mechanism, and you say, well, I already do the onboarding with the data consent, then just set the Boolean, and it won't prompt the user anymore upon login.
But is there something built into DNN registration itself? Like when
Yeah, so what we just saw, like there's a DNN registration thing in terms of an extra screen that handles the setting of these of the user portals. Now, the one tricky thing, and that's the last thing I want to mention, is and gets to be a bit more complex, but I think in this setting is useful to discuss, is what if you want to create your own custom data consent solution. Because this is not going to cover 100%, like I mentioned quite a few times now, it's not going to cover all use cases. So there will be times when you want to give, for instance, different checkboxes. Yes, I will consent to this, but no, I don't consent to that, etc., and still allow the user to continue the experience because you have something very particular happening in your site. Then what you can do is you can set this setting, and I'll come to that. That's the mystery setting here. Site behavior, privacy, data consent settings, consent redirect. Now, what this does is upon redirect, and I should create another page first because otherwise I can't properly demonstrate this. I'm just going to go for a add page. I'm going to call it consent and just add it there, and for now it's going to be it has to be unauthorized users can go there, but you can, for instance, hide it in the menu, do what you want with that. Depends on your use case, I guess. So that's there, and we have our home page still. So now what we do is in the site settings we say, well, actually I have my own solution for this, and when the consent needs to kick in, when data consent kicks in, I'm going to redirect to this page. Now you probably can figure out what's going to happen. I take another user. I will take this one, and I now try to log in as this user, which will be, and now all of a sudden I'm on the consent page, right? Because I figured out that this user actually needs to consent before anything else can happen. Now the problem is, the big technical challenge is this person is not logged in. Because if I log the person in, they can just navigate out of this page and they're logged in without ever having consented to anything, which is not possible. The only way you can possibly solve this is by a mechanism which is similar to the update password mechanism, is that you set a token on the users table that you can update your password with this token, and you leverage that token to find the user again, because DNN has a method to say, well, find the user by the upgrade password token. It will give you the user back. So if you have a custom solution, you can fill this page with a module that uses the token that's now passed in the query string, retrieves the user from there, and handle the logic for your consent, and then destroy the token, of course, afterwards, etc. Like, it is up to you to do whatever you want behind the scenes, but in my opinion, this opens the door to custom data consent solutions. Right? You are able to find to retrieve the user who needs to consent at this point. So I don't know who has ever made custom GDPR modules or solutions. No one yet? I've heard of one or two in the community that had made custom solutions, because we didn't have anything yet standard in DNN, but I hope they're able to leverage this and make their life a bit easier, and then for instance use the core methods to update for the user what their status is, so that in a future point in time, modules can leverage it, right? If you need to somehow know if a user has consented or not to something, you might say, well, if I'm publicly posted as a module, I will need to know something about, will need to know this, for instance, from the user or not. So that is it. And with that, I open the floor to more questions. We have another couple of minutes.
First, I would like to say it's great. You've done a great job.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I think it's very good because it's compliant with GDPR, and it looks like it's compliant. I mean, we can show and prove that we're compliant, which is very important for the lawyers. Just so, to me, that's really good. Just a question on the side note: why don't we get rid of the legacy authentication, Microsoft authentication provider, get back the salt and the hash into the user tables? I believe that it would not be a great work for people like you. I would not be able to do it myself, but I'm sure you would without much trouble. And that would simplify the authentication process in DNN. Remember the legacy reason why historically we did that, because there was hope that Microsoft authentication provider would be a Microsoft strategy, and we would keep it for a long time, but in fact now it's useless. And I think that it is not very difficult. We just have to move a few columns that are in the membership table into the users table, and it would simplify everything about user management.
In the Microsoft tables, the whole profile data is in the.
Yes, there are one or two tables, but not so many columns, because there are many other things we don't use in that in that
Sure,
provider,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it makes
Yeah.
everything
But I mean,
because you have to synchronize
Yeah.
both solutions.
Yeah. It kind of falls outside of outside of this.
Certainly.
I know it is I know for a fact that we are looking to replace the entire ASP.NET membership provider that we have. And also that may prompt a discussion on whether we are going to in the future share users still between portals, which is where we get into a lot of complexities when you are tackling these issues, right? So if you want to anonymize, for instance, I mentioned this here in this small list, like our multi-tenant model and user accounts. It's a bit wacky for GDPR compliance. And the ability to anonymize user is related to that, because if all of a sudden I change the name, the display name of a user and his email address, then in another portal it will boom, it's gone as well, like it's anonymized as well. So that's something you want to avoid. And I would love to see some kind of a messaging system or some kind of advanced mechanism where a module could be notified that a user wishes to be anonymized or removed.
Not only by user deletion, but deletion of portals.
Exactly,
pages,
exactly, the
deletion,
whole thing.
all kind of things.
And
that
yeah.
What I see difference is that sometimes people build referential integrity
Yeah.
implied to the base tables.
Exactly, exactly. And so that exactly, that brings up. I think as we move forward, that's one of those things we've got to see how we can do that better, so that it becomes easier to do the compliance.
Right.
Because now it's just one switch, and the modules are going to
Most of the
handle.
time,
Yeah, they will solve. Okay, this user is removed. Okay, I do this, or I anonymize, or like with forums. Do you yank out the entire post because that user is now no longer
Yeah, that's right.
there, right? It's
But
or the
we
comment, yeah,
anonymize it at
Yeah.
that point.
yeah, exactly.
I assume as well then that if you have a multi-portal installation and if someone wishes to be deleted from only one, if
Yeah.
they then it throws them out of the other one as well.
No.
Then-
No, it can't. It can't. Because those two portals might be completely unrelated.
Yeah,
There's a different mechanism to have related portals, which is called
Groups.
portal groups.
Site groups.
Exactly, site groups. And I am in favor of us implementing the UI for site groups into the base platform implementation. Exactly. And currently the UI is only in Evoke, but we are putting pressure on, like, this is part of that detachment process, right? Saying, look, all the code in the API is there. Either it goes out or we get the UI for it. But we can't be expected to maintain code that is for us doing nothing, right? And so that's an ongoing tug and, you know, push and pull. But I'm expecting that site groups will come into the core, into the base platform, and that so we can properly manage also the future of these user accounts. Like you say, okay, the site groups, that's solved, that's not a problem. Like you remove there, you're going from the whole site group. But two sites that are not part of a site group, two portals and not part of a portal group, you can't delete one from the other. Like
I have a question a little bit out of line. You showed you use PowerShell scripts to create a website.
Oh yeah. It's the NV quicker solution, if you like.
Do you share those
I
PowerShell scripts?
never-
Because if people want to do testing,
Yeah.
I would love to have a small team to create.
Let's talk about that at the testing workshop, because those are the kinds of things I want to bring forward. Like, how can we make testing easier for everyone?
Is that the
Yeah.
PowerShell integration prompt?
No,
API?
actually, that was I did this before already. It only runs locally, but it would be good to have that in prompt as well. Timo?
I'm guessing that the texts are in regex files, right?
Yes. Everything is in resource. Sasha?
Is there in the logging of giving cons, when you give cons,
Yeah.
you you know which version of the privacy statement?
Good question. So here's the thing. There was in the very original design of a solution, it was like, oh, but we need to keep every version, like who consented to which version. I was like, well, that's taking it really far because it means adding extra tables to DNN, and for this I found that was an overkill. So what it will allow you to do is, because you have has agreed to terms on, if you update your terms and conditions, that button that sits there in the UI, there's a big button to the right that says I've updated the terms and conditions. It will set has agreed to terms for that portal completely to false for all users. But that second column, has agreed to terms on, is not touched. So if you want to puzzle back and say, well, someone who has this user ever agreed to any terms, you can detect that, right? Because that second column will have a date timestamp. And if you actually do it properly, you can make a module that has a versioned HTML thing, and you can then, right, say, okay, well, he actually agreed to version 3, and now we're on version 5, right? It can be done technically, but you know, the framework doesn't do anything anymore with that information other than say, well, you've consented or not consented. But third-party modules could piggyback off of it.
But the text you will see if you have to renew is the same as the text you will see if you have to
Yeah,
access
absolutely,
for the first time.
absolutely the same thing. Yeah, yeah. Because when you switch it on, actually, it's also kind of an implicit thing that you've probably been consented to this beforehand. But now we've switched on the GDPR function, so yeah, that's the first time it ever kicks in.
Thank you.
Okay.
Misschien is het idee om te vragen of er mensen zijn die het willen testen en feedback willen geven.
Yeah, testing workshop. No, but indeed, 9.4 is currently in RC, so I invite you all to, you know, find the latest build of DNN and play with this and give us feedback if you see something that is awkward or should work differently. Yeah, just to let us know.